Hello and welcome to another TLDR US video. Not long ago, we published videos outlining some of the reasons why Trump may and may not win on November 3rd. And as we promised, now we've come to you with the other side, the case for a Biden victory. Before we get to that, it should, as always, be noted that we're not making predictions here. We're just taking a look at the cards that Biden's got lying in his favour, and how they might be played in the coming months. So, don't roast us in a couple of months if it turns out that Biden loses in a landslide. That caveat aside, let's get on with the video. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, then be sure to hit the subscribe button now. And I know we call you guys out on this a lot, but loads of you still haven't subscribed. So go on, hit the button to be updated as we get closer to election day. Let's get the big one out of the way first. Biden's numbers are just much better than Trump's. At no point in the last year have Trump's polling averages brought him even close to overtaking Biden nationally. Right now, even with the Republican convention not far behind us, Trump is still polling 6 or 7 points below Biden on average. And before we get all of the "what about Hillary" comments, let's just take a look at how dear old Hillary was doing back in 2016. Now, as you might note, the answer is a pretty resounding meh. Sure, she was leading, but not by a lot, and not nearly as consistently as Biden is. We even made a whole video breaking down the whole polling drama, so if you're interested, confused, or just bored, feel free to go and check that out. As always, there's a link in the description. It's around here that we should note that, of course, the election is not decided by the popular vote, a state of affairs that continues to anger many democracy advocates and Hillary Clintons across the nation. Instead, the presidency is determined by the Electoral College. But, well, Biden's actually doing pretty well there too. His lead is certainly smaller there than it is nationally. But if I were a Biden advisor, I certainly wouldn't want to leave any of them on the back burner, so to say. But I'd also much rather have Biden's numbers than Trump's. Following RCP averages, he's only underwater in one swing state, that one being North Carolina, and even there, he's only trailing Trump by a fraction of a percent. And the thing to remember here is that in order for Biden to lose most swing states, he doesn't just need to go down a point or two. Trump also needs to go up a point or two. And therein lies the problem. The simple fact is that Donald Trump is not popular. Take a look at his approval ratings, especially in comparison to previous presidents. You find his ratings both remarkably consistent and remarkably low. And, well, constant and low just isn't a great state of affairs for your popularity to be in if you're trying to win an election. And sure, many people will vote for Trump even if they disapprove of him, because the alternative, in their minds, is far worse. But even in national polls which include such reluctant voters, Trump has a ceiling that would give any campaign a cause for concern. Specifically, Trump's ceiling appears to be somewhere in the range of 46%, which, an observant viewer might note, is rather less than 50. Of course, that didn't stop him in 2016, but again, 2020 is a very different dumpster fire. And while Trump's low ceiling might have been enough to beat the wildly unpopular Hillary Clinton, he may very well not have enough support to topple the fairly well-regarded Joe Biden, who does not seem to have a similarly problematic ceiling. And the cherry on top for Biden's polling, third-party voters are expected to be very markedly down this year. Partially because Bernie's doing a lot less moping this time around, and partially because the stakes are just much clearer. However you cut it, Biden's numbers are looking pretty solid, and while there certainly is time for Trump to mount a comeback, that occurrence is looking increasingly unlikely. Why? Because, to put it bluntly, Trump's messaging is a mess. Make America Great Again may be a fun and dandy slogan when you're the challenger, but it's hard to run against the status quo when you are the status quo. And Make America Great Again is, well, just really? That's the best they could come up with. But it's not just Trump's slogans that are getting confusing. His wider argument is, well, muddled to put it kindly. Perhaps Trevor Noah explained these contradictions best.
Because if Joe Biden gets elected, MS-13 is going to move in next door. But we won't live there anymore because we'll be kicked out of the suburbs. And if we try to go to church, the Democrats will call the cops on us. But there won't be any cops because they defunded the police. So we'll have to take ourselves to prison. But they abolished the prisons. So now all the criminals are out on the streets, which means they can shoot us. But they can't shoot us because the Democrats have taken away all the guns, which means all we can do is fight with our words. But we can't because words have been cancelled. I don't know what it means.
Yes, The Daily Show is, to put it mildly, not exactly unbiased coverage, but Noah's actually got a point here. Trump just doesn't seem to have a consistent message, and often the various messages he does try to put out are blatantly contradictory. But perhaps more importantly, very few of them are sticking to Biden. Arguably, Trump's most consistent attack on Biden is that he's some puppet of the radical left. And CBS did some polling in Georgia and North Carolina, two major swing states, to try and see whether this attack was landing. And the results are fascinating. Overall, things wouldn't seem great for Biden, as nearly 40% of voters in both swing states viewed him as very liberal, compared to only around 20% who view him as a moderate. But going deeper, the numbers tell a different story. This is because, though a plurality of voters saw Biden as very liberal, most of those voters are strongly partisan in one direction or another, meaning they're not exactly the most flippable voter. However, the self-described moderates, i.e. the voters that both Trump and Biden desperately need to win over, tend to see Biden as a moderate. Specifically, around 45%, a strong plurality of moderates, view Biden as ideologically similar to themselves. Trump's moderate rating among these voters? Just 13%. It should also be noted that in 2016, Trump was seen as the more moderate candidate of the two options. But this time it seems to have flipped, and I think it goes without saying that you don't want moderate voters thinking that the other guy is more moderate. And this isn't the only sign that Trump's attacks aren't landing. It could be quite validly argued that the most worrying sign for the president's campaign strategy came with its response to the Kamala Harris announcement. Do voters tend to decide based on the Veep? No. But a campaign's response to a vice presidential choice is quite telling, and Trump's was just a disaster. Despite Harris being the expected candidate of choice for months, the Trump team's attacks out of the gate were chaotic and contradictory. Most notably, they tried to play the "she's a cop" card right next to the "she's an anti-police radical" one. Which, make your own conclusions about the competence behind that messaging. All things considered though, Trump's messaging isn't looking superb. He doesn't appear to be getting through to moderates, his arguments are a tangled mess, and his team's strategy is problematic at best. And given his already not ideal public standing, Trump could really use some good messaging. In a neighbouring category is Trump's similarly tangled response to the current crises taking place across the US. Most notably, of course, is the coronavirus. In a recent Gallup poll, Trump's net approval rating on his handling of the pandemic came in at negative 27%. Yes, negative 27, which is a disastrously bad number that could very much define the election. Even on his signature issue, the economy, Trump is on shaky ground. In fact, that very same Gallup poll put his net approval rating on the economy at negative 3%, which, while certainly better than negative 27%, isn't particularly reassuring for someone seeming to stake their whole political life on being trusted with the economy. In fact, of the 7 key issues that Gallup asked voters about, Trump scored above 50% in exactly 0 of them. Again, not good if you're hoping for a Trump win in November. And while these things are more against Trump than for Biden, in both the messaging category and the approval rating, Biden doesn't really have to do much. He just has to portray himself as better than the incumbent. Another good sign for Biden and the Democratic Party as a whole is the Senate. There are a whole number of Senate races in play this fall, and among the most competitive include Montana, Iowa, and South Carolina. Collectively, those 3 states went for Trump in 2016 by an average of nearly 15 points. Now, will Democrats necessarily win these seats? No. They may very well lose in all 3, and Biden almost certainly won't carry any of them, with the potential exception of Iowa. But the fact that they're so competitive this year is a great sign for the Democrats. This isn't even to mention the Senate races that are expected to go blue, which include Arizona, Maine, Colorado, and North Carolina, none of which are exceedingly blue ordinarily. In fact, the Republicans from both Maine and South Carolina, those being Susan Collins and Lindsey Graham respectively, are long-term incumbents. The simple fact is, things are looking better for the Democrats around the country than they are for the Republicans. All of this put together doesn't paint a particularly reassuring picture for the Republicans. And while there's still 2 months to go, a lot of things would have to go right for Trump for him to have a reliable chance of winning. But even that's stretching it, because really, there's a lot less than 2 months to go for Trump to save himself. And that's because, given the current pandemic, a huge chunk of the US is expected to vote early and vote by mail. The battleground state of North Carolina, for example, will begin sending out absentee ballots 3 days from now. This process will continue throughout the next couple of months, meaning that every passing week, more and more people will have already voted. And given the current numbers, that's something the Biden campaign will certainly be pretty happy about. What do you think though? Do you think that Biden has a good chance of winning, or do you back Trump's odds of getting a last-minute comeback? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Also, if you want to hear the other side of the story, the reasons why Biden might lose the election, then be sure to comment below to let us know. And if we get enough likes and comments, we'll put a video out on that in the next week or so. And be sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon to be notified when that video is released. Special thanks to our Patreon backers who make videos like this one possible. To support us on Patreon and see your name listed at the end of the videos just like these people, then click the link in the description.